That night, a military cargo plane the size of a building tried to land on my tiny dirt runway. What happened next would save everything I was about to lose. My name is Jack Harper, and at 64 years old I was watching my entire world crumble. The sun barely peeked over the Missouri hills when I climbed onto my rusted John Deere tractor that morning. My joints screamed in protest. Farming for 4 decades will do that to a man, but the crops wouldn't tend themselves. I glanced toward the north field, where my grandfather's landing strip cut through struggling corn rows like a scar. Most folks called me crazy for keeping it. Waste of prime farmland, my neighbor Peterson had sneered just last week. Smart farmers maximize every acre. That's why AgriCorp is buying us all out while you're drowning in debt. My loyal German Shepherd Duke jumped up beside me on the tractor seat, his graying muzzle pressed against my arm as if he understood the weight crushing my shoulders. The landing strip hadn't seen regular traffic in 20 years, but I kept it pristine anyway. Grandpa built it in 1942 for civilian defense flights. Dad maintained it through Vietnam. Now it was my turn, even as foreclosure notices buried my kitchen table. Every week, another local farm fell to AgriCorp Industries. They devoured the Henderson place last month, the Garcia farm before that. Their lawyers had approached me 3 times, each offer more aggressive than the last. The catch? They'd immediately plow under the airstrip for extra planting space. Some things you can't put a price on, I muttered to Duke. The old dog's tail thumped once in agreement. My phone vibrated against my hip. The screen showed Mike Rodriguez, who ran the county airport 40 miles away. Morning, Mike. Jack, we've got a monster storm system barreling your way tonight. Weather Service is calling it the worst in a decade. Appreciate the warning. I'll batten down the hatches. Your strip still operational? Always is, clear and ready if anyone needs sanctuary. Mike's laugh crackled through the speaker. Same old Jack. You know that runway isn't even on current aviation maps anymore, right? Grandpa used to say preparedness matters most when nobody expects you to be prepared. After hanging up, I spent the morning walking the runway's 3,400 feet of packed dirt and gravel. I filled 2 small erosion spots and cleared some blown branches. The strip wasn't fancy. Hell, it wasn't even paved. But I kept it smooth as glass. By afternoon, the western sky had turned an ugly purple black. I'd lived through plenty of Missouri storms, but something about this one raised the hair on my neck. I secured the equipment, reinforced the barn doors, and headed inside as the first fat raindrops splattered against the windows. I was heating leftover stew when my landline rang. That old phone hardly ever made a sound anymore. Harper Farm. Mr. Harper? The voice was sharp, military precise. This is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, Air National Guard. Can you confirm you maintain a private airstrip at your location? My grip tightened on the handset. In 40 years, the military had never called about Grandpa's strip. Yes, ma'am, about 3,400 feet, dirt and gravel surface. What's its current condition? Pristine, but we're getting hammered by rain right now. Colonel, what's going on? A pause. We have a developing emergency. A C-130 Hercules is transporting critical medical supplies to Kansas City Children's Hospital. Primary and backup airports are completely socked in by weather. I almost laughed. Colonel, a C-130? That's a massive cargo plane. My strip is meant for crop dusters and small private aircraft. I'm aware of the limitations, Mr. Harper. However, the aircraft commander specifically requested your coordinates when we mentioned your area. Who's the pilot? Major Rebecca Walsh. The name hit me like a lightning bolt. Becca Walsh, the scrawny teenager who used to hitchhike 15 miles just to watch planes land on my strip. The girl I'd taught to fly in my beat-up Cessna when her own family couldn't afford lessons. The same kid who'd sent me a photo years later wearing Air Force wings, captioned simply, "Thank you for believing in me." Becca knows this is impossible, I said, my voice catching. A C-130 needs twice my runway length, especially in these conditions. It's suicide. Major Walsh seems to disagree. She said, and I quote, Jack Harper keeps that strip better than most commercial runways. If anyone can help me pull this off, it's him. Through the kitchen window, rain lashed sideways in sheets. What Becca was suggesting wasn't just risky, it defied the laws of physics. If she crashes on my property, people die, I stated flatly. If those medical supplies don't reach Kansas City by dawn, children die, Colonel Chen replied. The decision is Major Walsh's, but she needs your help. Can you light the runway? I closed my eyes, remembering Becca at 16, tears streaming down her face after her father's funeral. She'd lost everything, but still dreamed of flying. I'd promised her then that dreams were worth chasing, no matter how impossible they seemed. I'll light it, I heard myself say. But you tell Becca if she destroys my grandfather's runway, she's buying me a new tractor. The storm had transformed into a monster by the time I pulled onto my rain slicker. Wind nearly knocked me flat as I hauled emergency LED markers from the barn, battery-powered lights I'd never imagined using for something this insane. Duke whined from the porch, smart enough to stay dry while his fool owner played with death. I drove steel stakes into the increasingly soggy ground, spacing lights along both edges of the runway. My truck's headlights provided extra illumination as I worked. Within 20 minutes, I was soaked through 3 layers of clothing, but the runway glowed like a highway to heaven. Or maybe hell, considering what was about to attempt landing on it. Back in my truck, I tuned to the emergency frequency Colonel Chen had provided. Harper Field to incoming C-130. Runway is marked and lit. Surface is soft but holding. Wind gusting from the west at 30 knots, maybe more. Static crackled. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 15 years filled the cab. Deeper now, seasoned by command, but unmistakably Becca. Copy that, Harper Field. This is Angel Flight 782, beginning approach. ETA 4 minutes. And Jack, thanks for keeping the lights on. I positioned my truck at the runway's north end, adding my headlights to the party. The rain had eased slightly, but wind still threw my vehicle around like a toy. I stepped out, squinting into the churning darkness above. The sound reached me first. 4 massive turboprops churning through the storm. Their drone unlike anything my little strip had ever hosted. Then landing lights punched through the clouds, turning rain into silver needles. The C-130's massive silhouette emerged, looking impossibly huge against my familiar fields. Too high, I whispered. Way too high and fast. But as I watched, the aircraft's nose pitched up dramatically. Massive flaps extended fully, and the plane seemed to hang in the air, bleeding speed at a rate that defied everything I knew about aerodynamics. The main wheels kissed the runway exactly where I'd placed my first marker, sending up sheets of water and mud. Reverse thrust engaged with a roar that shook the ground. The massive plane rushed past my position, eating up precious runway feet at terrifying speed. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only watch as physics and skill battled for dominance. Halfway down the strip, she was still moving too fast. 3/4, murmurs, and I could see the drainage ditch at the runway's end approaching like destiny. This was it, the moment my stubbornness finally killed people. But Becca had one more card to play. The aircraft suddenly lurched as she applied differential braking, the tail sliding slightly left. The maneuver scrubbed off crucial speed while keeping the plane centered. With barely 100 feet to spare, the C-130 shuddered to a complete stop. I stood frozen in the rain, unable to process what I just witnessed. That landing should have been impossible. No pilot should have been able to put a fully loaded C-130 down on 3,400 feet of wet dirt in a storm. My radio crackled. Harper Field, Angel Flight 782 is safely on deck. Jack, you still make the worst coffee in Missouri? Despite everything, I laughed, really laughed for the first time in months. Coffee hasn't improved any, Becca. Neither has your flying, apparently. That was the ugliest landing I've ever seen. Ugly but effective. We'll take it. I drove down to where the aircraft sat, its bulk making my strip look like a child's toy. The rear cargo ramp was already dropping, and Air Force personnel emerged into the rain, moving with urgent precision. A figure in a flight suit broke away from the group, jogging toward my truck. Even through the rain, I recognized her immediately. The skinny teenager had become a compact woman with Major's oak leaves on her shoulders and confidence in her stride. But the grin was pure Becca Walsh. Jack Harper, she said, pulling me into a wet hug. Bet you never thought you'd see a Hercules on this strip. Bet you never thought you'd be crazy enough to put one here, I replied, returning the embrace. You trying to give an old man a heart attack? She pulled back, studying my face. You look good, Jack. Tired, but good. You look like someone who just cheated death and enjoyed it. Her grin widened. Learned from the best, didn't I? Now we need to get these supplies unloaded fast. Pediatric cardiac equipment that'll save a dozen kids if we can get it to Kansas City by morning. The next hour passed in controlled chaos. I helped the crew transfer specialized medical equipment from the aircraft to my barn. Ventilators, ECMO machines, experimental cardiac devices, millions of dollars of life-saving technology now sat between my old hay bales and rusty farm implements. How long are you stuck here? I asked as we secured the last crate. Becca wiped rain from her face. Until this storm breaks and I figure out how to get a loaded C-130 off your strip. Landing was actually the easy part. Easy, I snorted. That's what you call nearly ending up in my drainage ditch? Hey, missed it by at least 90 feet. That's practically conservative flying. By midnight, we transferred everything to the waiting medical transport trucks. The storm had finally begun to weaken, though rain still fell steadily. My small kitchen overflowed with Air Force personnel, grateful for hot coffee and shelter from the weather. Becca and I found ourselves at the kitchen table, just like old times when she'd stay after flying lessons to help with farm chores in exchange for flight time. Remember what you told me after Dad died? She asked quietly, when I said I'd never be able to afford flying lessons? I remembered. The girl had been shattered, lost everything when her father's factory job disappeared. I said wings don't care about your bank account, only about your heart. You did more than that. She looked around my worn kitchen. You gave me 300 hours of flight time in exchange for farm work, wrote recommendation letters, drove me to my Air Force entrance exams. Her voice caught. You saved my life, Jack. You saved your own life. I just provided the runway. She studied me with those sharp pilot's eyes. Speaking of runways, this place looks rough. The farm, I mean. No point in sugarcoating it. Agricorp's been circling like vultures. Bank wants their money in 4 months or they auction everything. I managed a weak smile. Guess I should have taken their buyout offer. They wanted the airstrip gone, didn't they? First thing they mentioned, prime corn acreage, they called it. Becca was quiet for a long moment. Then, what would Grandpa Harper say about that? Probably something unprintable. As dawn approached, the storm finally broke. Weak sunlight filtered through dissipating clouds as Becca stepped onto the porch, calculating. We've got a problem, she announced. Even with reduced weight, I need more runway for takeoff. This mud isn't helping. I knew what was coming. How much more? Maybe 300 feet. We'd need to fill part of your drainage ditch, level some field beyond it. She met my eyes. I'm asking you to destroy part of your crop, Jack. I know what that means right now. I looked at my struggling corn, already stressed by drought earlier in the season. In good times, those acres might generate enough for a mortgage payment, but these weren't good times. The Air Force will compensate you, Becca added quickly. That's not the point. I studied the young woman I'd helped raise in a way. The point is whether I trust you to get that bird off my property without killing everyone aboard. Do you? I thought about all the impossible things I'd seen Becca accomplish through sheer determination. Get your people. Let's extend this runway. Within 2 hours, Air Force engineers had arrived with equipment. I watched them efficiently fill part of the drainage ditch and level a section of field, creating an additional 400 feet of rough but usable surface. My corn disappeared under their machines, but I felt oddly at peace about it. Word had spread through the county like wildfire. Vehicles lined the road bordering my property. Neighbors, local pilots, even reporters from the city paper. I spotted Tom Peterson, who'd mocked my airstrip just days ago, standing with a phone raised to record. Becca completed her pre-flight check and paused beside me. Any words of wisdom, instructor? Yeah, don't crash. I can't afford the cleanup. She laughed and snapped a salute that was only half mocking. Roger that, Harperfield. The C-130's engines roared to life, the sound rolling across my fields like thunder. Becca taxied to the very edge of the extended runway, using every possible inch for her takeoff roll. I stood with the growing crowd, watching as she ran the engines up to full power. The aircraft began to move, slowly at first on the soft surface, then gathering speed with agonizing gradualness. The original runway disappeared beneath the wheels. She hit the extension, still accelerating, but not yet at flying speed. "Come on, kid," I whispered. "Show them what I taught you." Two-thirds down the extension, the nose wheel finally lifted. The mains followed a heartbeat later, and the C-130 clawed skyward with maybe 50 feet to spare. The crowd erupted in cheers as Becca banked gracefully toward Kansas City, waggling her wings in farewell. "Absolutely unbelievable," Peterson said, approaching with what looked like humility on his face. "Jack, I owe you an apology. That strip, that was something special." Even Mark Sullivan from the bank shook my hand. "Incredible thing you did here, Jack. Just incredible." 3 days later, I was repairing fence posts when a convoy of black SUVs rolled up my driveway. Duke announced them with authority, though his tail wagged. These weren't AgriCorp lawyers. A man with stars on his shoulders emerged from the lead vehicle. "Mr. Harper, I'm General William Morrison, Air Mobility Command. We need to talk." My kitchen had never hosted a general before. Morrison got straight to business over coffee. "Mr. Harper, I've reviewed Major Walsh's report extensively. What happened here was unprecedented, but more importantly, it highlighted a critical gap in our emergency landing infrastructure." I waited, unsure where this was heading. "Your strip's location is strategic," he continued. "It sits perfectly between several major air corridors, in an area where weather frequently makes primary airports unusable. We've had 3 near disasters in the past 5 years that your field could have prevented." "It's just a dirt strip, General. My grandfather would be amazed it handled a C-130. Which brings me to my proposal." Morrison leaned forward. "The Air Force wants to designate your strip as an official emergency landing facility. We'd upgrade the surface, install proper lighting and navigation aids, and establish a maintenance contract that would, frankly, solve your financial difficulties." I stared at him. "You're serious?" "Completely. The designation comes with substantial lease payments for the runway usage, plus facility management fees. Your farm would remain yours. We'd only need easement rights for the strip and immediate surroundings." He smiled. "It would also prevent any agricultural corporation from ever converting this to cropland." My hands shook slightly as I set down my coffee cup. "You're talking about saving my farm. I'm talking about you continuing to save lives, Mr. Harper. Major Walsh's landing wasn't the first time this strip served our nation, just the most dramatic. We'd like to make the arrangement official." What would my grandfather think? I wondered aloud. Based on the strip's history, I believe he'd be proud that his vision is still serving its purpose, just with bigger aircraft than he imagined. I thought about the foreclosure notices, about AgriCorp circling lawyers, about Becca risking everything to land here because she trusted me to keep the strip ready. Where do I sign? 6 months later, I stood watching Air Force engineers put the finishing touches on what was now officially designated Harper Emergency Landing Facility. The surface had been reinforced with a special composite that maintained the strip's character while supporting heavier aircraft. New LED lighting could be activated remotely, and a small weather station fed real-time data to regional flight centers. The financial arrangement had saved more than my farm. I'd paid off the mortgage, bought back 2 sections I'd been forced to sell, and even purchased a new tractor, though I kept the old John Deere for sentimental reasons. A familiar sound drew my attention skyward. Becca had promised to be the first to officially test the upgraded facility. Her C-130 appeared right on schedule, performing a demonstration landing that was textbook perfect, nothing like that wild night 6 months ago. "Jack," she called out, jogging over with General Morrison beside her. "How do you like the improvements?" "Still looks like Grandpa's strip to me," I said, which was true. We'd insisted on maintaining its rural character. Just happens to be able to handle anything up to a C-17 now. "Speaking of which," Morrison interjected, "Harper Field has inspired us to identify similar strategic private airstrips nationwide. You've started something significant here." We walked toward the farmhouse where a dedication ceremony was being prepared. The entire county seemed to have turned out, including Peterson, who'd become one of the Strip's biggest supporters after witnessing Becca's landing. Mark Sullivan from the bank stepped forward with other business leaders. Jack, the Riverside County Commission wanted to present you with this. He handed me a plaque reading, in recognition of the Harper family's 80 years of service to aviation and emergency preparedness. Your grandfather's vision continues to save lives. After the ceremony, as the sun set over my saved farm, Becca found me sitting on the porch with Duke. You know what the best part of all this is? She asked, settling beside me. What's that? Somewhere out there is another kid who thinks their dreams are impossible because they can't afford them. And maybe they'll find someone like you who shows them that runways don't care about your bank account. I scratched Duke's ears, watching the upgraded strip catch the last rays of sunlight. Your landing that night, that was still the craziest thing I've ever seen. Want to know a secret? Becca grinned. I was terrified, but then I remembered what you taught me. Sometimes the impossible is just the possible waiting for someone brave enough to try. I said that? About 1,000 times, usually right before you let me attempt something that scared me senseless. She stood stretching. I better get airborne. Got a cargo run to Seattle tonight. As her C-130 lifted off into the Missouri sunset, I reflected on how close I'd come to losing everything. Agricorp had offered money, but they'd wanted to erase 8 decades of family history. Instead, by holding on to something that seemed worthless to everyone else, I discovered its true value. General Morrison joined me on the porch. Major Walsh speaks very highly of you, says you're the reason she flies. She's the reason this farm still exists, I countered. Funny how life works. You help someone chase their dreams, and years later they return to save yours. Duke patted over, settling at my feet with a contented sigh. The old dog had the right idea. We'd weathered the storm, kept faith with the past, and found a future nobody could have imagined. My grandfather built his strip believing that ordinary citizens had a duty to be ready when their country called. He never dreamed that call would come in the form of a massive military aircraft attempting an impossible landing in a thunderstorm. But he'd prepared for it anyway, passing down not just a runway, but a philosophy. Stay ready, stay faithful, and trust that purpose will find you. Looking at my saved farm, my upgraded strip, in the flight path where Becca's aircraft had disappeared, I understood that some things are worth preserving, not for what they earn today, but for what they might mean tomorrow. Sometimes salvation comes on wings, landing on a strip that everyone said was worthless, maintained by a stubborn farmer who refused to let go of his grandfather's dream. The emergency lights along the runways flickered on automatically as darkness fell, ready for the next impossible landing. And I'd be ready too, just as 3 generations of Harpers had been before me. Because that's what you do when you're entrusted with something bigger than yourself. You keep it ready for the moment when impossible becomes necessary. That night changed everything, but it also confirmed everything I'd always believed. Heritage isn't about holding on to the past. It's about keeping faith with values that transcend time. My grandfather's strip had waited 8 decades for its moment of greatest purpose. When that moment came, we were ready, and we always would be.